Chapter 34. The Giant Eagles. Bird of the broad and sweeping wing, thy home is high in heaven, where the wild storms their banners fling, and the tempest clouds are driven. The Eagle, Percival. The airships and chariots of the guests, to the number of several hundreds, manned with their officers and crews, were mounted on platforms and glades near the chateau. The prince, the kings, the princes, and royal suites, with the assembled throngs, left the pavilions and made ready for departure to their respective kingdoms and places of abode. Bidding adieu to the Grand Duke, Prince, and Princess, they embarked on their fleets. It was a grand and beautiful sight to see these ships and chariots decorated with their royal insignia and banners rising gracefully from the green lawns like flocks of birds on their migrations, their shining hulls and glossy wings glittering under the bright sunlight with various colors. Some sailed majestically over the landscape like eagles, some flew around in great circles like falcons, others like skylarks swiftly ascending in lofty spirals, till they were lost in the fleecy clouds. While the ducal party were preparing for their departure, Altafora and I walked out on the lawn in front of the chateau. A young man of dark red complexion and piercing black eyes came forward and greeted the prince. He was clad in a dark green suit, belt, and cap. His name was Tsar Ronzal, the keeper of the royal eagles. "I will now introduce you to the little children that pulled you and Selima out of the water," said Altafora. Ronzal blew a shrill whistle from his silver pipe. An enormous eagle flew from the foliage of the trees and alighted on a sward before us. I confess I was not a little startled, and as I stood in the presence of this formidable bird, whose aspect and dimensions called to mind the fabled rock of the Arabian Nights. "Come hither, Madame Lucia," said the prince, holding out his hand. The eagle approached and bent her head to receive his caress. She was full 9 feet in stature, her plumage a rich lavender color mottled with dark brown shades. Her breast from the throat down was snow white. Her wings and tail were edged with bands of golden yellow, her beak dark blue, and her feet armed with long steel-colored talons. Her eyes were hazel, their expression soft and gentle. A long tuft of crimson feathers ornamented her head. Her wings, when expanded, measured 36 feet from tip to tip. Altafora requested Ronzal to relate the incident of the rescue. "I was in the cleft of a rock on the yonder peak, 1,000 feet above the lake, and a mile from the cataract, with Ombriam and Lusa, who were building their eyrie there, when I heard the cries of the people and saw the red flag, signal of danger, floating from the Duke's barge, announcing that someone had fallen overboard. The next instant, Lucia, whose keen sight had discovered her beloved mistress in the water, sprang from the rocks and flew like an arrow from the bow. I instantly surmounted Ombriam and followed her. I never knew her to fly so swiftly before. She made that distance of a mile in less than 20 seconds. I had to lie flat down on Ombriam's back and clasp his neck with all my strength to prevent from being blown off as he followed close behind her. Reaching the cataract, Lucia swooped down, sailing over the raging waves in great circles with her eyes fixed below. Sometimes she disappeared amidst the cloud of spray. No human eye could have seen, nor human hand rescued you from that hell of waters. Finally she caught a glimpse of you and dove down like a rifle ball, seized you with her beak, dragged you almost from under the foot of the cataract, and clutching your body with her talons, carried you, holding the insensible princess in your arms, to the boats, flying round till then you were safely landed on the shore. The prince now came forward with 2 of her maids. Lucia uttered low cries of pleasure at the sight of her beloved mistress, crouching on the ground, fluttering her wings. The princess caressed her, and taking from a casket a gold chain in metal, carved in commemoration of her rescue, bound it round Lucia's neck, while a maid presented a basket of bonbons, with which the princess fed the bird, who ate them with a great gusto. "Here comes Ombriam," said Ronzal. A loud flapping of wings was heard, and another gigantic eagle of still greater dimensions came flying over the lake towards us, and alighted near Lucia's side. "Come hither, Ombriam," said Altafora, and the eagle stepped forward, bending low his royal crest for his master's caress. As he stood upright, Ombrium was 12 feet in stature, his plumage iron gray, his wings and tail edged with dark green. A tuft of jet black feathers tipped with white surmounted his head like a plumed coronet. His large dark eyes, shaded by heavy brows, had a majestic and commanding expression. His enormous and hooked beak was black, and his talons a foot long. One blow from his claws or one stroke of his beak could have crushed the ribs or split the skull of a lion. "Stretch out your wings," said Altiphora. Ombrium rose to his full height, expanded his mighty pinions like the sails of a great ship. They measured nearly 50 feet from tip to tip. The intelligence and docility of these formidable birds was extraordinary. They understood and obeyed the slightest word or gesture of command from their masters, and their instinct in rescuing persons from drowning was superior to that possessed by any of the canine tribe. Ronzal informed me that their usual speed, when mounted, was from 60 to 70 miles per hour, and they could easily make 800 miles per day, with occasional rests. When urged, they could fly over 100 miles per hour for short distances at still higher rates. Ombrium had often flown 25 miles in 10 minutes, and Lucia could cover 2 miles within 40 seconds. "Come, Princess," said Altiphora, "let's take a trip over the lake and show Lieutenant Hamilton the mettle of our feathered steeds." The Princess assented, and Ronzal put the eagles in harness. This consisted of a light saddle with stirrups and holding straps securely fastened around the body behind the shoulders and wings. We advanced to the brink of the precipice. The Princess mounted Lucia, and Altiphora and Ombrium. Feeling rather nervous over this somewhat bold adventure, I could not refrain from manifesting it. "Do not entertain the slightest apprehension," said the Princess. "There is no danger. I have often enjoyed these trips, and feel even more secure with Lucia than when mounted on Yvonne Arundia." "Do you not use bridles?" I asked. "What? Bridle our royal birds?" said Altiphora. "No, indeed. You will see how they obey the slightest word or gesture of their masters." Lucia now turned her head round, bending her soft dark eyes on her mistress with an almost human expression of affection, while the Princess caressed her. "Are you ready?" asked Altiphora. "Yes, and in haste to be gone," Sulima replied, her beautiful features all aglow with anticipated pleasure. Altiphora gave the signal, and the eagles spread their wings, rose majestically in the air, and launched out over the abyss. For a moment my heart seemed to cease its beating as, standing on the verge of this awful precipice, 1,000 feet steep down, the thunders of the cataract resounded through the rocky amphitheater. I watched their flight. In a few minutes they crossed the lake and paused on the summit of a lofty precipice. Then they coursed to and fro over the waters with an easy and graceful motion. The facility with which the Princess and Prince guided their feathered steeds was marvelous. Amid their swift circlings, sudden detours, down swooping and uprising, they held their seats firmly as if on a rock. Suddenly, like arrows from a bow, they flew towards the cataract, rushed towards the wreathing mists, and appeared hovering above the verge, majestically sailing to and fro with scarcely perceptible motion of their wings, then poised high over the awful gulf like Tell's eagle. Over the abyss his broad expanded wings lay calm and motionless upon the air, as if he floated there without their aid, by the sole act of his unlorded will, that buoyed him proudly up. All at once they swooped down to the base of the cataract, plunging amid the columns of foam and whirling spray. The sight was appalling. For an instant I caught a glimpse of Sulima amidst the awful chaos. She seemed to have lost control over Lucia, and swayed to and fro, as if reeling, falling. "Heaven save her!" I involuntarily exclaimed, covering my face with my hands. In a few moments they emerged, sweeping round and round in great spirals, ascending higher and still higher, even to the fleecy clouds, until they were lost from view. The next moment down they plunged from these awful altitudes like meteors, then gracefully lighted on the grassy sward. The Prince and Princess dismounted, while the eagles shook their dripping plumage amid the branches of the trees. The countenances of Altiphora and Sulima were animated with excitement and pleasure. Altiphora stepped aside to confer with Ronzel. "I sincerely hope your Highness enjoyed your trip from sea to sky and from clouds to earth again," said I. "Oh, it was glorious!" exclaimed Selima with enthusiasm. "That grand and majestic roar, that chaos of billows and foam, those whirling columns of spray amidst which we dashed to and fro, that flight amidst the clouds, which, as we rose far above them, gleamed under the bright sun like a vast aerial ocean of rainbow waves, whose crests were crowned with millions of glittering jewels. As I looked upon her glowing countenance, radiant with almost celestial beauty, she seemed like a superior being, whose dauntless heart and exalted soul transcended the highest ideals of mortals. "I marked the spot where you rescued me yesterday," she said, with a pleasant smile, "and I threw a jewel there as a memento." "You lost control over Lucia, did you not?" "Only for an instant. We had approached a little too near the falling columns of water, and that was all." "You seemed as if you were on the very verge of falling into the raging abyss." "Really, Lieutenant, you compliment me highly on my skill as an equestrian," replied she with a merry laugh. "But if you had fallen?" said I, feeling my cheeks growing pale. "Admitting it possible that I could have been so awkward, Lucia would have rescued me instantly." "Oh, Selima!" I fervently exclaimed, How could you, for the sake of a brief pleasure, risk such awful danger? I could not again endure the anguish I suffered when I beheld that sight, not for the wealth of kingdoms, no, not if I were to add years of untold happiness to my allotted span of life." For an instant Selima shuddered, grew pale, then with a fleeting glance of her lovely eyes, and in tones of deepest feeling, "And I have caused you this pain?" she murmured. "Oh, how thoughtless I have been! Dearest friend, forgive me, I implore you." The tears came to her eyes as she struggled with her emotions. Altiphora now joined us, and we returned to the chateau. On the following morning the Duke announced our departure to the royal palace in the city of Elfrezula, the capital of the kingdom, situated about 600 miles distant in the interior of the continent on Lake Ambu Bashanta, or Shining Water, in company with Onegar Tholoba, the Princess Luzella, Prince Horvorian, and several distinguished guests. We left the chateau, embarked on the royal airships and chariots, passed over the Ambu Sayama Lake and mountainous regions of the Jrny River, reaching the plains, crossed two of the great linear cities traversing the continents from east to west. Sometimes we advanced at a moderate speed in order to view the charming scenery. At others we flew at the rate of 200 miles per hour. Finally reaching a great mountain chain, we ascended to its summit, and the beautiful lake of the Shining Water spread before us. On the opposite shore appeared the magnificent city of Elfrezula, its domes, towers, and temples glittering under the sun like burnished silver and gold. We flew across the lake, reached the city, alighted in the royal grounds, and entered the palace of the Grand Duke. The following day, in company with Prince Altiphora and Harrovian, we took a tour over this great city, compared with which not only do the proudest capitals of Europe sink into utter insignificance, but which, in its superlative grandeur and beauty, might be an earthly pattern of the mansions of the blessed.